So Esther and I married young. We were 19. We hadn't dated for that long, and I was 100% clueless just about life in general. Looking back, I have absolutely no idea what gave me the idea that I was ready to be married. In fact, it was kind of funny. It was like years later, like all the adults in my life at that time, I went to them like 5 years later when I kind of figured out how dumb I was. And I was like, what were you guys thinking? Like, how did you let us get married in that situation? Like, I'd been walking with God for like 3 minutes. Like, what was everybody thinking? And it was kind of funny, but I don't really know how anything ever worked out. I had no clue like how life was supposed to work. I didn't know like romantic engagements were a thing. I guess I didn't watch any movies or anything because like I didn't know you were supposed to do that. Like, so Esther and I were talking one day. I was like, hey, when I get like a job and a car, you want to get married or something? And she was like, yeah, that'd be cool. You have to ask my dad first. I was like, oh, is that a thing? People do that? Okay. And so I guess I'll do that then. And then like not long later, somebody gifted me a car and I got a job. And when they called me to tell me I had the job, I was like, so I got the job. It looks like God answered those prayers. You want to do this then? Like, there was nothing. Like, I didn't know like that you were supposed to actually ask or I don't. And so it was like years later, and people, you know, we get to witness this really romantic proposal, and everybody starts telling their proposal stories. And I was like, did I miss a class when people tell you how to do this stuff? Like, how did I not know people did this? Like, I didn't know that people did any of that stuff. I didn't know that like weddings had rehearsals and rehearsal dinners. I learned those the week of the wedding. Like Esther was like said something about rehearsal. I was like, what is that? And she was like, we go to the rehearsal the night before for the wedding. I was like, oh, like a practice? I didn't know we did that. Like I knew nothing about anything. I didn't know people gave gifts for weddings. I didn't know that was a thing. So it was like Christmas to me. I walk in, there's gifts everywhere. I'm like, what is this? She's like, they're wedding gifts. I was like, that's so cool. Like, I don't know how I didn't know these things, but I knew nothing. And if I was this clueless about how the wedding works, you can imagine what kind of husband I was, like right off the bat. Like I knew nothing. I mean, in my defense, there was some confusion because I was also kind of getting to know what it meant to walk with God. I didn't know any of that either. And so it was really common for me to do something completely ungodly, and everybody would look awkward. And I was like, do we not do that? Is that a thing we don't do? And they're like, yeah, Chris, we don't do that. And I was like, oh, sorry. I guess I didn't know. Is there like a little rule book I can use? Like, how do I know what the rules are? I don't know what the rules are. And it was kind of embarrassing when Esther and I first started dating. I had to sit her down. I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't know what the boundaries are. I don't know how this works. If I do something like that I'm not supposed to do, you have to tell me because I'm clueless to how this works. And I was kind of talking about like purity issues and boundaries and stuff. But if she had said, well, in Christian relationships, the girl drives, I'd have been like, that's weird, but okay, whatever. Because I don't know anything. Like whatever they told me, I would have believed it because I had no clue how things were supposed to work. And so the real problem was that not only was I just clueless about life in general and how everything works, like wedding rehearsals and wedding gifts and stuff, but I was also clueless about what it meant to walk with Jesus and how that was supposed to work, and the two got mixed up all the time. Like I didn't know what was normal. So it was like common for me to be talking to friends and be like, did you know Christians give weddings, like gifts at weddings? Like who knew? And they're like, dude, everybody gives gifts at weddings. I was like, what? I thought that was the Jesus thing. I didn't know what, so I didn't know anything. And so you can imagine how mixed up I got when I married Esther, and on day one, she wakes me up and I find out she got up an hour ago and made me breakfast. Like, and I thought I didn't know if this was a Christian thing or just what wives did. Like, I didn't know but I was thrilled. I was like super excited about it. I was like, this marriage thing is awesome. And my conclusion was that marrying a Christian woman is amazing. Like, they should get the word out because this is great. Like, if people find out that Christian wives like make you breakfast and stuff, this is going to revolutionize things. Like everyone's going to want a Christian wife. This is awesome. And so there was actually this guy at church. Like I'd been married like a week, and Rod Mooneyhan was his name, and he was old enough to be my dad. And so not long after Esther and I got married, Rod was talking to me, and he was like, how's marriage treating you? And this is like how clueless I was. My assessment of marriage went something like, oh, it's awesome. She gets up every morning and makes me breakfast. What's not to love? This is great. And Rod gave me the much older and more experienced smile and just patted me on the back, and he goes, give it time. And in my arrogance and vast experience, I thought to myself, poor brother Mooneyhan, he totally should have married a Christian woman like I did. But I was it is purely, completely, and utterly by the grace of God and the patience of my beautiful wife that I'm still married after 30 years, because I knew nothing. And maybe the worst part of being that clueless is learning something new later and then looking back and realizing how dumb you used to be. You look back and oh God, I can't believe I said some of those things and did some of those things. I had no clue what I was doing. It's always embarrassing to look back. But today we're going to be talking about a scene in the scripture where the main character is utterly clueless. This morning is our 19th week in this summer series we've been calling Welcome to the Kingdom. And we're going to be reading in the book of Genesis chapter 28, if you want to follow in your own Bible. We're going to start in verse 10. But I'm going to set this up just a little bit. This is Jacob's life. And Jacob is a mess at this point in his story. Some of it was the hands he was dealt. He was a twin, but he was kind of from the shallow end of the gene pool. His brother was bigger and stronger and manlier. His brother likes to hunt and fish and work on cars, and Jacob has binged every movie in the MCU and makes a great chicken parm. But that would have been very frustrating in that day as a twin. When most of us are familiar with sibling rivalry a little bit, and some of us have lived with the why can't you be more like your brother? But can you imagine how much harder that would be if you're twins? If you're the exact same age, you were born together, and everybody is wait, you guys are twins? But he's so, and you're so, that would have been what Jacob lived with. How can you two be twins? But Jacob grows up under the weight of comparison. Even the Bible is it's kind of a funny verse. This is the very first verse after their birth story about Jacob. This is how the Bible introduces Jacob to us. It says, as the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob was a quiet temperament and preferred staying at home. That's how the Bible introduces Jacob to us. So even the Bible is so Jacob wasn't exactly his brother. He's definitely not his brother. So part of Jacob's issues was kind of the hand he was dealt. But the majority of his problems were of his own making. Jacob takes advantage of his brother's hunger to steal the firstborn's kind of extra inheritance. And with an act of sheer kind of deceit and greed, he also steals his brother's blessing. So when we read today's passage, Jacob is on the run from the consequences of his own actions. His brother wants to kill him, and Jacob has to run for his life. And so he's kind of a refugee here. It says, meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from earth up to heaven, and he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord your God, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are laying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. The next morning, Jacob got up very early. He took the stone he had rested his head against and set it upright as a memorial pillar. Then he poured olive oil over it. He named that place Bethel, which means house of God, although it was previously called Luz. Then Jacob made this vow, if God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, And if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I have set up will become a place of worship for worshiping God. And I will present to God 1/10 of everything he gives me. This is the word of the Lord. So I've always kind of resonated with this story a little bit. I've always kind of come back to this story because it holds one of the scariest verses in all the scripture to me. And honestly, I came here this morning primarily for that verse, but as I spent time in this passage this week, I was drawn to just how clueless Jacob is here in this story. And as I was reading it kind of over and over again, I felt like that 19-year-old kid kind of out on my own for the first time trying to figure out how the world worked. And I think that makes sense for this story because that's exactly what's happening in Jacob's life right now. The Bible tells us he was kind of a homebody. He preferred to stay home, and this is the first time he's out on his own. He has left home for the very first time, and I think it kind of shows. It says, meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba, traveled toward Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against to lay down to sleep. Now, I'm not saying he's an unprepared camper, but he uses a rock for a pillow. And I actually did some research because I was just wondering if that was normal. And it absolutely was not. In the ancient nomadic tribes, they had all kinds of pillow options. They were actually kind of cool. They would roll up hides and use them as kind of a rolled pillow. There's drawings of that. They used tightly woven kind of pillowcases that they would weave with fabrics and stuff them with either grasses or sheep wool. Like they had all kinds of options. We found all kinds of things that those nomadic people of that day used for pillows, and Jacob's using a rock. And so it doesn't sound like he brought all the provisions with him he was going to need. The only kind of explanation for why Jacob would choose a stone over a hide pillow or a grass pillow or a wool pillow is because he's clueless, because he's of a quiet temperament and prefers staying at home. So Jacob is not made for sleeping out on the street. He's out in the wild. He's kind of clueless. So the first observation I want to say is that Jacob was just generally clueless about life in this story. He's completely out of his element. And that's not a bad thing. It's definitely not like an evil thing. He's just clueless. He just doesn't know what he's doing. He's out camping and did not bring what he needed, and so he's making do with a rock. And I think this is important to recognize because honestly, I think a great deal of evil can happen when we pretend to know more than we actually know. I think sometimes when we're clueless, it's better just to own that. It's better just to say, Jacob was clueless. He had no idea what he was doing, because we can get things really bad when we pretend to be smarter than we are. And so just for fun, I looked up some things that we as people used to do on a regular basis that we have sent back, because we knew everything there was to know. And then we've since learned some things. And so in the 1800s, there was no good green dyes. So they had other colors, but green wasn't really an option for clothing or for paint or they didn't have any great ways of making green. And so suddenly someone discovers a great way to make green, and it was all the rage for a little while. The paint you put on the walls, the fabric for couches, dresses, wallpapers, everybody wanted green for a little while. And then as people started getting really, really sick, they figured out you cannot use arsenic in dye. It doesn't work. That was how they made the green dye. They used arsenic, and it dyed things green really, really well and then killed people. And so they stopped doing that. Heroin was originally sold as cough medicine by Bayer Drugs. One of their first cough medicines was actually a heroin base, and it took care of coughs, which is great. Many of us can actually remember. Do you remember when you used to hold mercury in your hand and play with it at school? They'd give you a ball of it, let it roll around, which they now know causes like heavy metal poison really easily. Mercury like soaks into your skin really easily, and now it's like, don't ever touch the mercury. They quit putting it in thermometers and everything because it's really, really dangerous. And we all played with it. In Snow White, or not Snow White, in The Wizard of Oz, the snow scene with the snow blowing everywhere, that was asbestos. And you used to be able to buy it in an aerosol can to spray on your Christmas tree. And so if you wanted snow in your house, you bought asbestos and just sprayed it around the house, which is awesome. Now, if you find a little bit of it in your house, you got to tent the whole thing and pretend like, yeah, it's crazy. In 1951, they have found prescriptions. It was a very common prescription. They would prescribe cigarettes for anxiety for pregnant women. If you're having some anxiety while you're pregnant, a couple cigarettes, knock that right out. So that's awesome. Radium, they used to put it in toothpaste, makeup, hair products, because it created a whiteness and a glow that that nothing else would give. And even once they figured out that it was causing radiation sickness, they were still using it. There's a name for these women who worked in clock factories, and it's what they would paint on the clocks to make them glow in the dark. So that you could see the clock hands and numbers even in the dark, and these women were just painting with radium, and most of them died of radiation sickness. DDT, which is now completely illegal, they used to have one you could buy to spray on kids to get rid and treat and prevent lice. So you just spray the DDT right on their face and stuff, which is awesome. Anybody know what benzene is? Benzene, I looked it up. The natural sources are volcanoes and forest fires, but it's a natural part of crude oil, gasoline, cigarette smoke. According to the CDC, benzene causes cells to not work correctly, so it makes your marrow not make enough white or red blood cells, so you get anemic. It can also damage your immune system by changing blood levels and antibodies and all kinds of things. Soaking coffee beans in benzene is how they made the original decaf coffee. They just soaked it in benzene, which is why I've always thought decaf was evil. But you guys could probably give me 10 more things that we used to think were safe, and then like everybody knows are terrible now, completely verboten. But it also goes the other way. Like, it's amazing how many things that they used to think were terrible now they're saying are good. And I'm not kidding. The Mediterranean Institute in Italy just completed a large study of people who drink beer daily. And according to their study, 25, like the people who drink beer every single day, they had 25% less heart disease than the control group, 40% fewer kidney stones, 50% fewer heart attacks, and 50% fewer strokes. They just released this study this year. Another study of wine gave similar results. And if you prefer Cabernet Sauvignon, there was a marked decrease in Alzheimer's for that particular type of wine. Another study showed that women who watch TV, not the news, but TV shows, something with a storyline, have lower cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone. Apparently experiencing positive interpersonal interactions, like in a sitcom or something, even amongst fictional characters, provides a sense of belonging and improves mood and increases energy. And my favorite, I'm not kidding, this is Oxford University. A study showed that women with a larger than average backside are generally smarter, more resistant to chronic illness, and have lower cholesterol than their smaller bottomed counterparts. The study showed that moms with bigger rear ends had more DHA in their breast milk, which leads to more intelligent children. People are studying this stuff, which obviously means you should stop exercising, grab a beer, and watch some TV. Like that's the healthiest way to live, according to the studies. And the only thing that makes all of this crazy and a little sickening is that tomorrow they're going to come out with some new discovery, or some new study will be published, or some new wonder drug or superfood will get FDA approval, and we will be 100% sure that this time we're right. This time we have it all figured out. This time we know what we're doing. Everybody before us was dumb, but now we know. Now we have it. Now we're enlightened. Now we know what we're doing. We're no longer clueless. And I think a lot of evil happens that way. Sometimes it's better to just own that you're clueless. And I think in this story today, Jacob is clueless, and it's okay to own that. It's okay to say, I have no idea what I'm doing in this moment. And I believe Jacob kind of represents the human condition in this chapter. He's out and he's clueless. Because I don't care who you are, using a rock for a pillow is not the way to go. And it might take 50 years for someone to figure it out, but if you are, it's better to just accept that you're clueless. And I think recognizing that we're clueless, accepting that we are in the middle of nowhere, just trying to do our best to make it with a rock for a pillow is actually a healthier place to be. Owning that we do not have it all figured out is better. So Jacob, in the midst of this cluelessness, has a couple revelations. It says, as he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from earth up to heaven, and he saw angels of God going up and going down the stairway. The verse I'm actually after is the next verse, but I do want to say this. I love that this ladder is a two-way road, that it goes up and down. Angels are going up and down, that the author makes sure to point that out. Because I think oftentimes in Christianity we get kind of overly fixated on heaven. Like the whole thing about Christianity is just the going up, like just getting out of here and going to heaven. That's the only thing that's really important. And don't get me wrong, that's absolutely a great part of it, and I'm thrilled about that piece. But I love that the ladder comes back down. That part of the Christian life is God being a part of what we do and wanting to make changes in our lives right here and now, and wanting to be a part of our lives, that the ladder doesn't just go up, it also comes down. And others get so caught up in the fact that the ladder flows down that the whole thing is about getting blessings here and being comfortable here and having the best possible life here, and we forget that there is an eternity to think about, and that there is. So I love that this ladder goes both ways, and I think we need to kind of hold that tension. Yes, the Christian life is about way more than just the 70 years we live here. But at the same time, it's also, if it was all about heaven, we would just hold you under a little longer when we baptize you. And I did not make that joke up, and I've told it many times, and every time I'm like, man, that's a morbid joke. But anyway, the verse I'm looking for is this next one. It says, at the top of the stairway, stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I love this so much, and I wish I could have witnessed this conversation, because what do you say to that? Like, as far as you know, your granddad was a nomadic shepherd that owned no land. Your dad is a nomadic shepherd who owns no land. You're traveling just kind of on a public roadway in the wilderness, and God tells you that you own this particular piece of ground. Like, I hope you know this is yours. Do you even believe him at that point? Like, I don't know how you respond to that moment. And I know this is cheesy, and I'm going to date myself too, but when I was reading this and I was kind of trying to put myself in Jacob's shoes, I pictured that scene in The Karate Kid where Mr. Miyagi takes him out to the cars, to all the antique cars, and he's like, choose. And Daniel's like, what? Are you kidding me? And he kind of freaks out in disbelief and hope and humility and pride, and all that kind of emotion is warring on him. Yeah, that was lame. But the thing that jumps out at me is the fact that Jacob seems clueless about what's his. He's not only clueless about just life in general, but he's clueless about what is his, the promises of God that are his. We know that God promised Abraham this land. And we might assume that Abraham told his stories to Isaac, and Isaac told his stories to Jacob. I don't doubt for a second that happened, because it feels like it would have to for us to have the story, that it had to get passed down. But how many of you know that you can tell your kids about Jesus all we want, and they can still not know what's theirs, what's been given to them, what is their inheritance? In fact, Esther and I have been praying regularly that the kids at OTCC would have almost this exact conversation with God. That there's nothing we want more than God to wake up our kids and say, hey, the ground that you are on is yours. Like, you have an inheritance. You have things that are promised to you that are yours. How many of you know that we need that too? We can come to church every single Sunday morning and sing our songs and lift our hands and still not know what God has promised to us. Still not walk in the promises that are ours. In this story, Jacob finds that he is clueless about the true nature of his inheritance. He does not even know who he is. And God says, hey, I hope you know this is yours. You have an inheritance. You have some things that have been given to you. I think there's even more important revelation here, because Jacob is running for his life because he's stolen when you have been given this rich inheritance. And if there's one message I would love to get to American believers who feel like the real fight for the soul of our nation is in Washington, is this message. You're fighting over peanuts, and God is like, you realize the kingdom is yours, right? You're fighting over these little tiny things, and the ground you are lying on is yours.